Hello everybody and welcome to another OPW University video. My name is Dan Boyle. I'm a product manager here at OPW and today we're standing inside the Smithfield, North Carolina retail manufacturing plant. In today's video we're going to be covering the EVR AST requirements. So this means that with our certification and recertification courses, you're going to use this video as a supplement to our documentation. So that documentation is downloadable off of opwglobal.com. You also may have it in a manual booklet form that you might have gotten either in the mail or from a district manager in your area. So what this video is meant to do, and you are meant to watch this all the way through, and you can use this as well as that manual as resources while you're taking the certification test. Now in that test it is 25 questions and it is required that you get 19 of those correct in order to be a certified AST EVR technician. So what is EVR? EVR stands for Enhanced Vapor Recovery, and in these areas we're trying to capture the fugitive emissions between the transfer of the tanker to the above ground storage tank with a minimum efficiency of 98%. So ultimately, what we're trying to make happen is the fuel go from where it needs to while capturing all of those vapors as best we can without allowing them into the open air. So how does OPW play into AST EVR? Well, we make the equipment that meets the strict regulations that EVR requires. And this video, along with the documentation that you downloaded or the manual that you have in your hand, are meant to really drive home the most important parts of how they get installed so that we can meet these requirements in a day-to-day working system. As we cover this breadth of topics in the AST EVR video, you may notice that I'm not wearing any of the proper PPE. That's because I'm doing this here in the display area of the OPW facility. But whenever you're out there in the field, you do need to comply with your local authority having jurisdiction, check with OSHA or your safety manager, and make sure that you're doing all the things necessary to protect yourself and the people around you. So getting into section 1 and section 2, we're going to focus our attention on the above ground spill containers as well as the replaceable drain valve that's housed within it. My hand's right here on the 332 AST. This is our EVR CARB certified above ground spill container. You can see that we do have a coating on it, and it does have that replaceable drain valve right there on the inside. So as I was saying, to keep all of those emissions where we need them, proper installation is key. So we're standing here next to our cutaway tank, and we've already got our little riser here installed in the tank. Now that was done with our TC400 cap. We spun that on there, got it tight, and then we also dropped our 61 SA tool right on top of those ears to tighten it down to make sure that we hit that torque spec. Now again, I'll say this numerous times throughout this video, when we're working from the tank top and we're working with that torque spec, we're going to make sure that each time that we put a new piece on, we're stacking a little bit less torque and a little bit less torque. So this needs to go in at 125 to 250 foot-pounds. I would put that on the higher edge, about 250. And then whenever you go on with your spill container, you're going to want to torque that slightly less, maybe 215 or 200. So we'll go ahead and put our 332 on our riser here. Once you've got your 332 bucket spun onto your riser, you're going to use the 61 SA tool. You're going to remove this piece here from the larger black piece, and it's going to rest against these ears. This gives you a provision for your torque wrench, which is going to allow you to spin this bucket on to the proper torque so that the system from bottom of tank top or top of tank top all the way up to your fill adapter are properly torqued. Now one piece of advice before you tighten the spill bucket is I would tie a string right here through this hole, just in case something were to happen and this were to slip down inside the tank. You'll have an easy retrieval so you can get that bucket tightened. Once you've got your bucket in place, we'll put our 61 SA tool back together. We'll go ahead and start spinning our nipple in to put our fill adapter on. And here again we will use our 400 TC to torque this down. Here again this one's going to be 125 to 250, and you'll want to be less torque than the bucket just below it. Once we've got that properly torqued on, now it's time for us to put on our fill adapter, which will be torqued on between 90 and 110 foot-pounds with a strap wrench with a provision for a torque wrench. Should any damage ever come to this 332 series bucket, this is a replaceable part. You see that we do have the 8 washers and bolts down here through the rim. If you remove those 8, you can remove this piece from the base with a repair kit. After that, you'll just have to torque these back down to 15 to 20 foot-pounds. You'll also see that we have our replaceable drain valve right here. Should this ever need to be replaced, this is a replaceable part as well. You can just back the 2 bolts down here out of the housing. Those will come out and you'll just kind of pry this off to the side and you'll feel it pop. Now whenever that drain valve comes out, you want to make sure that it comes out with its O-ring. If it doesn't, just make sure that you reach down in there and get that O-ring. Whenever we put our new one in, we don't want to stack 2 on top of each other. After you get that out, you want to make sure that you clean that area very, very well. It's best to use acetone with a cotton rag. That way we can make sure we get everything cleaned up and any of the harder debris that's left in there has a chance to come out. And then whenever we put ours back in, we'll make sure that we put our O-ring on top of the drain, and then you'll push that down and you'll apply pressure. You'll both hear and feel a click once you have that O-ring seat, and from then you can slide these back over and you're going to torque
down the bolts in the drain to 11.5 to 13.5 foot-pounds.
When we covered the installation of this and we talked about torque spec all the way up, the one thing I omitted to say, and it's very important, is that whenever you install any of those NPT fittings, you always need to use an oil and gas resistant non-hardening pipe dope. That makes sure that we get those good seals around every NPT joint that we're talking about. So on all of those NPT joints, we're always going to make sure that we're using that non-hardening gas and oil resistant pipe dope. Moving on into our manual, we'll be looking at sections 3, 4, and 6. So these sections will cover first overfill prevention, and then we'll move on into drop tubes and cam lock adapters. So how do we stop an overfill in above ground? And that is with our 61 f-stop. I'm showing you here, this is our 61 f-stop -1000. This is going to be installed in the top inside the spill bucket, just like in the UST. Some of the big differences that you'll see here though is that the 61 f-stop has its floats that rise vertical, and that if you were to try and look inside there, it doesn't make a difference because of the way that this is sealed. Do know though that whenever this valve or this float lifts, there is a poppet inside there that is closing, which stops fuel. So these are rated to work at a maximum working pressure of 150 psi, although OPW does recommend that that you use 100 psi as kind of the best pressure to use as a fill on these overfill valves. As with any of our overfill prevention equipment, the install height of the 61 f-stop is critical. How far this goes down into the tank tells this float how deep it needs to go for the fuel to raise it up when it's time to shut off. So to help you find this critical component, to give you the short nipple, the 2-inch nipple that goes at the top, we've provided in your downloaded documentation a really nice chart that shows you the dimensions where you can cut those nipples so that you can get to the right height where you need to install. It is important to note that the 61 f-stop -1000 must protrude at least 7 inches into the tank, and the -2000 must protrude at least 4 inches into the tank. The reason we require this is so that any of the actuating parts of these overfill valves that move can do so freely without coming into any resistance from anything else inside the tank or the riser. So once you have found your critical dimension, which you need to cut your 2-inch nipple to, you'll need to, of course, use your non-hardening oil and gas resistant pipe dope, and you'll thread that nipple in the top of the 61 f-stop. Once you've got your nipple on, the next piece, which the part number I don't believe is shown anywhere in your manual, is the 1611AN-2040. And this is going to be the fill adapter that you use for these direct fill applications. You can see that it's got 2-inch threads as well as 4-inch threads. So again, with your non-hardening oil and gas resistant pipe dope, you're going to install your 1611AN. You'll get that on there, and this will be the entire piece that threads down into the riser inside your spill bucket. There are a couple of differences with the remote fill version of how you would do this. With the remote fill version, we're still going to use the same chart and measurements to get our installation height for our short nipple that gets installed. However, instead of the 1611AN-2040, we're going to remove this, and now this will be you'll pipe dope this, and this will go into the bottom side of a double tapped bushing, where that bushing has a 2-inch MPT on the inside and has 4-inch male threads on the outside to screw down into the bung of that AST. From the top portion of that, you'll have a nipple going up, and then you'll have your piping system running over to your remote fill located somewhere near the AST. Usually, sometimes within a 6211R, that is our version of the above ground spill bucket for remote fills, you will actually install this 1611AN-0200. Both the 0200 and the 2040 both need to be installed with a strap wrench with a provision in there for a torque wrench, and those need to be installed at between 100 and 105 foot-pounds. So now that we've covered the upper portion of the 61 f-stop, let's take a minute to look down at the bottom here on the drop tube end of the 61 f-stop. So all of the vapor seals are done in the body of the valve as well as at the top of the valve and the poppet to make sure that we're not releasing any of those vagrant emissions. Now the drop tube portion on the 61 f-stop is just it's just pinned in. So there's no seal, there's no gasket or O-ring. It's not going to be a tight seal, but it does just get pinned in there at the bottom. There are requirements for how far the bottom of this needs to be off the bottom. So for direct fill, just like in UST, it's required that we do a 6-inch from the bottom, and that is being measured from the high end of the cut. So from the high end of the cut to the tank bottom must be 6 inches or less. It is also said out there that if you're doing a remote fill and filling from another portion and it's coming in indirectly, that the drop tube can be cut up to 12 inches from the bottom of that tank. Again, measuring from the high side of the cut, but I would recommend that anybody who is going to cut at that 12-inch, please check with your local regulator first. We have heard that there are some folks out there that do like to keep that 5 or 6-inch maximum off the bottom, and just like we said at the beginning of the video, always ask and follow the local authority having jurisdiction's recommendation when installing these products. In section 7, we will cover our vapor adapters. Now we do have 2 separate offerings that are accepted by EVR for AST applications. First, we have our 1611-AV, and we also have our 61 VSA. Now there are some obvious differences in what they're made of, but they also have a few functional differences as well, where the 61 VSA does have the swivel that is mandated for the UST applications. In the AST, it is not required to use vapor swivel, but if you choose to, you do have to abide by the CARB test, the TP-201.1b, and you need to run that torque test, that swivel torque test, when you install it, 90 days post-installation, and then every 3 years. For the 1611 AV, you just have to put it on there the one time. There's no swivel, there's nothing to test. You can put it on and walk away. When installing either one of these adapters, please use a strap or chain wrench with a provision for a torque wrench, and then tighten them down to 90 to 110 foot-pounds. Section 8 is going to cover our vapor caps that are going to go on top of our adapters, and for this we do have 2 choices. We have the 1711T, which has the mechanism up here on top, and we have the 1711 LPC, which is our low profile, which doesn't have the locking mechanism that goes above the cap itself. This is kind of our last line of defense for keeping those vapors in the tank during normal operation whenever we're not transferring fuel any direction. Just a couple of items of maintenance that need to be checked on these, and that's on both of them. You need to check that the locking mechanism is working properly and that we're able to secure that cap to the adapter. And then we also just need to check to make sure that our gaskets on the bottom sides of these are free of debris. They're in good working condition and we're not seeing any frays or cracks in those. Now just below each one of these caps you'll see the replacement piece. They do actually have a different replacement number for that gasket, so do pay close attention to that. Moving into section 9, we'll be looking at our 301 emergency vents, which I'm holding here. So the 301 emergency vent is only for a serious pressure problem or some kind of catastrophic failure inside that AST. This is not going to be the primary mode that the tank is going to vent from. This is going to be the emergency vent. So the way this works is whenever there is enough pressure for it to lift this big heavy red cap, it will lift and cause that tank to vent as needed. A couple pieces of maintenance that need to be checked with on the 301 emergency vent once a year. So you need to be able to slide this red part up, make sure that it's moving freely, that there's no restriction anywhere in the post or inside the body of the vent. And also you want to check to make sure that your gasket here on the inside is clean, free of debris, and in good working condition. We're not seeing cracks and a whole lot of dryness in there. We do have a number of 301 vents for you to purchase depending on the size and layout of your tank. If you turn to page 67 in that manual, you'll see where we list out by the volume, by tank diameter, with a lot of variables to show you what 301 vent it is necessary for you to have on your AST. Moving into section 10, we do have a quick section here on probe monitoring caps and adapters. It is sort of uncommon to see an electronic probe on top of an AST, but there are some outfits out there that do like to do it that way. So we do have a solution for that, and that is the 62 M cap. The biggest thing to remember with a 62 M cap, whether you're talking about AST or even UST, is that this is a straight threaded adapter with a gasket on the inside. So if ever you're going to use one of these in a vapor tight situation or an EVR location, you do need to use the FSA-400. That is our face seal adapter, and that's got the nice machined top on it, so that is what the gasket of the 62M will seal against. So when you're installing these, you'll just need to remember that you'll use your TC-400 to install your nipple into the tank bung. And then with less and less torque like we talked about, you're going to then use the 61SA tool to tighten your face seal adapter, your FSA-400, onto that nipple with slightly less torque than the one below it. And then you will use a strap wrench with a provision for a torque wrench to put this on here, and then your 62 M cap will actually be tightened to 90 to 110 foot-pounds. In Chapter 11, we're going to be looking at the 1711D, which is the OPW Camveloc series of couplers. These are going to be what's actually on the tanker trucks that are going to be making the deliveries, and these are going to be attached. These are going to attach to either a remote or a direct fill line. These will attach to our 1611 adapters. So the way this operation works is you'll loosen up the two ears. You will slide the coupler over the adapter, and then you will relock the two ears on the side. Once you've got this locked, you can now engage the handle, which has a small trigger on the back. You pinch that trigger, you'll open this way, and you'll have free-flowing fuel and a good, clean, vapor-tight connection. Once fueling is complete, you push that button one more time, sling it back into the closed position, re-lift your ears, and then you can remove your coupler from your adapter just like that. OPW does sell the 1711 coupler. This is an Engineered Systems product, and you can look to Engineered Systems for videos on how to replace any of the internals. They also sell kits, but in this in the documentation you do have, we do give steps on how to replace any of those components on the inside. Here in Chapter 12, we're going to be talking about the 200 TG. This is our tank gauge for above ground storage tanks, and this is probably the most common form of tank gauging that we see on those ASTs. Some of the pieces that come along with this will be the drop tube, the nipple here for installation, and then the bushing that goes down into the bung itself. So first with the drop tube. The sole purpose of this drop tube is to keep our float mechanism and wire straight up and down vertical over the daily operation use of this AST. It is very important that in the top 6 inches of this drop tube you drill a 5/16 hole. Now the purpose of that hole is to allow airflow. So if ever the tank level rises above the bottom of this drop tube, if we didn't have that hole, the air would be trapped and it would stop any of the liquid from moving within this tube. So with that hole, we allow the tank to have free movement and the air to escape. So we'll install our drop tube right here in the top of this 2-inch nipple. And it'll slid and it'll just drop right through there. Now we'll take our float and we'll drop it right down inside of our drop tube. And then we're going to thread our tank gauge monitor here onto our nipple. Now with a strap wrench or a chain wrench with a provision for a torque wrench, you're going to torque this base down to 80 foot-pounds. A couple other things that are very important when you're dealing with a 200 TG. I've already removed some of these bolts so that we can get quick access to that, but I'd like to show you something that is pretty helpful whenever you're installing this for the first time. So the first time that you open your 200 TG, you're going to notice that there is a piece of cardboard in here that surrounds the spool. The point of that is to keep everything tight and to keep that spool of wire in good shape during shipping, in case this thing gets bounced around so you'd end up with a bird's nest before you even try to install. One of the really important things about installing the 200 TG is whenever you remove this cardboard for packing purposes is to keep tension on the reel underneath it so the weight doesn't, or the float doesn't just free fall to the bottom. This could make the gears spin too fast and essentially make that cable come off the spool. So the first time that you're going to be dropping this down, I'll put the weight on there from the float. The first time you drop this down into the tank, I'm putting my finger right here on top of the spool. I'm removing that cardboard piece, and then I can slowly drop this down into the tank until it reaches the opportunity for it to float. From this point, we can move on to calibration. Because we are talking EVR and we're very, very concerned about tightness on the tank, whenever you're reinstalling the cover for the 200 TG, there are these 8 bolts, and these 8 bolts have a torque setting of 15 to 20 foot-pounds. So do be sure that you're putting those back with the correct torque settings. The downloadable documentation does give step-by-step instructions on how to calibrate the 200 TG. It is worth noting that once a year, it is very important to go in and do a little maintenance, double check to make sure that the 200 TG is accurate as compared to a stick reading. Since we just mentioned stick in the tank, this seems as good a place as any to talk about one piece of equipment that doesn't show up in your manual. This is our stick port, and the only 2 purposes it serves is to give an opening here where we can stick the tank, and also because of all the build around this cap and adapter, it makes it impossible for any tanker drivers to ever use this as a fill port. So we can pop this cap off, we can stick the tank, and we can also know that this is a place that will never be filled. This is a great place to check the accuracy of your 200 TG. So the last 2 sections in our manual, section 13 and 14, cover the 144 and 444 TA, our Audible tank alarm, as well as the float switch that pairs with those Audible tank alarms. So our actual tank alarms are the 144 and the 444, and they look very similar, but you'll see that the 444 does allow for 4 individual alarms to be wired to it. So you've got visual indicators of each one of those alarms. The 144 is a single channel alarm that normally gets mounted right directly at an AST. Both have their uses and are excellent products. So the way we put these together is we will pair these with our tank float alarm switch. Now this alarm switch can be mounted as a low level or a high level alarm, and you'll see which one it's going to be reading by seeing there's a little arrow on here. If that arrow is pointing up, it's a high level alarm. If that arrow gets flipped around and is pointing down, it becomes a low level alarm. 2 things to note about the 444, 144, and float switch assemblies. If you're going to use this as a low level switch, we do offer extensions of the float switch drop tube that can be screwed together so you can reach the bottom of the tank. Also, we do have a maximum length for this wire of 1,000 feet from the tank to where it's going to be mounted. So we do have a 1,000 foot limiter on the length of wire that can be used. We install that into the tank with the use of our stainless steel float switch drop tube, and with the adapter that will then screw this into either the tank alarm or the bung for it to be hardwired elsewhere if you're using the 444. So the way this works is you'll cut this to length. We do have instructions in your manual. This is going to vary based on situation, so we're not going to actually cut this. But once it's cut to length, you're going to slide the wire end all the way up the tube so that it can be threaded into the bottom here. Both the alarm and the drop tube do have MPT threads where you can actually secure that to the bottom of the float switch drop tube. This will get put directly on top of the drop tube. You'll push that right on down there, and there's a set screw in the side. You can screw that in to make sure that those have good contact and this doesn't move. And then with the 144 TA, you can go ahead and just put that, you can just thread that directly into, if that's how it's going to be installed for that application. Whenever it comes time to test your Audible tank alarm system. We do right here, you'll see it where it says silence, which you can also push if it's in alarm to quiet it down. But whenever it's test time, we just push quickly, we push that button down. It gives us that alarm to let us know that that battery is there. If you do see that low battery light, we do offer replacements for those, and don't wait past that low battery light. If you do see that come on, it's time to go ahead and replace that battery. Before we close this video down, I did want to share with you a couple of resources that we have in the back of our manual that are of pretty high importance, and they will help you answer some of the questions on the test. So first, I'll show you back here in the appendices. On the first page, we have our OPW warranty registration card. That's right in front, and on the back you'll have more details about our standard warranty. After that, there is a venting guide. Now this venting guide will give you all of the equations as well as the tables that are going to help you figure out which emergency vent you'll need for what size tank that you have. That's a few pages deep. Once we get beyond that, we do have some diagrams here that show a couple of different tank applications in AST, and those do also give part numbers should you need to see what comes next in a system. We have some references here for NFPA. There's PEI RP in there, as well as some UL listings that come up when we talk about EVR. Beneath that, we have our torque specs. This is a great place to reference whenever you're either installing or before you go out to install, to make sure that you have those torque settings correct and that the system's going to be set up the way it should. And then lastly, back here we just have some maintenance information. This will give you a good idea of the schedule and what needs to be done to take care of these products so that they do have a very long life out there in the AST field. Well, that's the end of our EVR AST video. I hope you've got a lot of information from this, and it helps put together lots of great systems in the future. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to our website, opwglobal.com, or reach out to your DM if you have any specific questions. Thanks for taking the time and watching our videos. Have a great day.